Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spirabauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am thrilled to introduce our next guest as someone whose work I deeply admire, and I've been following their career for a very long time. We have Michelle Culver, the founder of the Rhythm Project, with us today. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Haley. Glad to be here.
No pressure, right?
Like you've been following my career. Oh, gosh.
For those that are unfamiliar, which I'm maybe there's a few, you also have done incredible work at Teach for America in the Reinvention Lab, and your work beyond that is really, really powerful, transformative work. And I'm excited for folks to hear about that, but also like what led you to the work you're doing right now. So I'm probably not alone in folks that have followed your career, to be very fair.
You're very, very, very generous.
Well, a huge shout out to our friend Mike Yates, who told me and introduced us that you would be a phenomenal guest. I'm excited to see all the magic that happens on this episode. So let's jump right in.
Well, Mike sets a very high bar, so let's be clear.
Oh, and he is very funny on the podcast.
That must be his. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been on twice, and I laugh so hard with him. And that's really, this podcast is sometimes really serious. We're talking about equity. We're talking about funding. We're talking about all these topics that are heavy. So again, no pressure, but we're excited to have you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And I will say, to Mike's credit, if we can't have fun as adults and we can't enjoy like learning together and being together, how do we expect kids to do that? So I do feel like he's an embodiment of that aspect of the future of learning on steroids.
I think that is so apt. I'm glad you pointed that out. And let's have some fun.
Great.
Michelle, how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
That's my typical first question. And you could take it as like deep as you want, or as like, this is the through line, take it where you want.
Well, I think maybe the formative experience that started my career was teaching in Compton in the late 90s, early 2000s. I started as a part of Teach for America, which at the time was like a very scrappy nonprofit, and actually ended up marrying the teacher in the classroom next door to me, which is not just a love story, but also actually shapes my professional career too, as you'll sort of see where this unfolds. But so yeah, I taught fifth grade in Compton, and I thought what was going to be 2 years at Teach for America ended up being almost 2.5 decades on the senior team, helping to be a part of dreaming into that vision for what the mission could allow, as we started to consider what it would take for every young person in this country to have a truly excellent education. And got to see the organization at so many different stages of organizational development, which was incredible. And one of the most important things I felt like I got to be a part of at Teach for America was my last part of my career was the Reinvention Lab, as you talked about. So for those who haven't gotten a chance to follow that work yet, the Reinvention Lab is the R&D wing for Teach for America. We asked ourselves, what is the future of learning? Where is the future of learning going? And then how do we put our assets to work on behalf of creating that future at Teach for America? And that came, maybe I should say that the reason why it was so important for me to create the Reinvention Lab at the time was I just spent a decade getting an opportunity to oversee a handful of the executive team and work with some of the fastest improving school districts in the country. And what happened for me at that stage of my career was I just kept thinking, like, how lucky am I to be a part of these communities where we're seeing transformation, not just at a classroom or school or even CMO, but an entire community level. And I saw that as like a case for, I don't know, evidence-based optimism, the sense that, we can actually, when lots of people work hard against a shared vision, start to move the needle. And at the same time, though, I had this very deep growing unease where I just kept thinking, if this is the best, put it on steroids, fast forward it through to its logical conclusion, this still ain't it for kids. Like, we're still not preparing young people for the world as it's evolving around them. And we will never realize equity in our lifetime. So that was, I guess, now about 5, 6 years ago, where I was having those musings, and it was coinciding really in a fortunate way with the Elisa Villanueva-Beer, the CEO's decision to really step back and imagine where the organization was going to need to go after 30 years of contributing to the field. And so that was the birth and genesis of the Reinvention Lab, was to ask what could be that next phase of contribution, and how do we become both a catalyst for the organization and for the field as we considered what young people were going to need. And then maybe I should say, from that position, part of what was I don't know, it was such an incredible opening for me, was that we started to get in a different relationship with young people. So we brought youth leaders onto the team, high school and college students, both as advisors and sometimes embedded in our actual co-design projects that we were working on. And one of the things I was just struck by was um, how often they were talking about aspects of like well-being and connection. And so for us as educators, so often we think about socio-emotional learning as a means to an academic end. And when you talk to young people, they were like, I want to feel alive, period. I want to feel less stressed and anxious and less alone in sort of the challenges and like longings that I have for in my life. And so that dissonance was just really sitting with me in the backdrop. And at the same time, because it was R&D, even though I'm not a technologist in background, I had folks like Mike, as you mentioned, on my team, and Yusuf from PlayLab. And so I was just so inspired by watching the way in which they were so embracing the arrival of generative AI. And so naturally, we were doing quite a bit of work thinking about what that would require. And so as a result, I immersed myself in all of these conferences and conversations to really try to understand what this was going to mean. But very quickly, I started to realize, like, man, this conversation that we're having as a sector is mostly about how AI is going to change the way we work and teach and learn. And all of that's important. I'm invested in that. But I kept hungering for a question about where's the conversation about how AI is going to change the way we relate to each other as people. And I couldn't find that conversation. And I just kept thinking, we sure as hell missed the mark on this, 20 years ago with the arrival of social media and the smartphone. So surely that's happening someplace else. We've got these two forces that are about to collide: the decline in human connection with the arrival of generative AI. And there's a real opportunity to have a very different conversation about that. So long story short, because I couldn't find others who were already organized around that, I decided to host last April the Human Connection and AI Summit. We brought together technologists, youth leaders, mental health professionals, educators, just to talk about what's going to happen with this emerging future and to envision many more possible options, and to try to consider, well, what would it take, or what would it look like for our leadership to be put to work on behalf of accelerating the futures that we actually really want. And at the end of that summit, folks said to me, this isn't just a summit, this is an organization. And so here we are, not even a year later, with the Rhythm Project.
Michelle, you ask big questions, which is, I think, it's hard in education when you're so focused on moving the needle for every kid.
Yeah.
And you ask really big questions. What big question do you think we should be asking ourselves beyond? Let me rephrase that. In the current climate, you've asked a big question about how AI interplays with human connection. What other big questions are you challenging people to ask as part of your work with the Rhythm Project?
Yeah, really what I want to know is, like, what will it take for young people to be prepared, not just to thrive in, but to actively shape this future of human connection? And so when you talk to young people, for them, it's not just about rebuilding, but it's also about evolving our understanding and possibility for human relationships as these new technologies start to shape the way we connect with one another. So I think that's questions like, what will it take for us to rebuild and evolve human connection in the age of AI, and ensure that young people are in the driver's seat of that?
Students so often know more about themselves and their future than any other person, including their family members. And so, what I appreciate about the through line of your work at Teach for America and here at the Rhythm Project is how you have them in the driver's seat. Because so often adults can tell kids how to think, how to operate, what to do. And so it's really cool to hear the central theme that you have. And for me, that seems like a really big through line in
Well,
addition to your big questions.
I mean, okay, so but then let me just say that's both a values-based orientation. It's also pragmatic because turns out, I mean, I don't know if you remember from being a teenager, when you tell a teenager what to do, it's not going to
They
work.
don't listen. I'm terrified of my kids becoming
It's not
teens.
gonna
I'm going to be very honest with you.
So a big part of what we're trying to figure out is like how to help people like where to point their eye to where to look as these technologies are coming onto the market, but not tell them what to think. Like
Mm-hmm.
trust that if you engage them by showing them a set of new technologies and say, what about this is going to strengthen human connection? What about this might erode it? What do you really want for your own human relationships? And how might this be of service? And how might you want to be um, cautious of this? They will come to really insightful perspectives. And that's far more effective than saying, like, don't do this, which just honestly doesn't have much of a resonance for them. And in fact, actually, we just did this research project where we're interviewing young people about their relationship with AI. And one of the most important questions we ask at the end is something like, what do you think adults are missing about this? And if you could take the mic and speak to them, what would you say? And almost every single young person, I mean, they had a range of answers to all the other questions, but this one was almost like consistent, interview after interview. They said some version of like, we're already using this. This is like an extension of the lives that we've been living our whole digital like existence. And so we can feel that you all are afraid. And so we're not talking to you about it. So just so
Mm.
you know, like we are clear that you are a lot more scared about this than we are. And so we're not really in conversation with most adults about our experiences with AI.
I mean, that's a mic drop right there from the mouth of babes, right?
From the mouth of babes, not mine. That's from them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so like let's talk tactically a little bit. Obviously, the convening led to people really wanting to continue this conversation, which led to the founding of the Rhythm Project. You're conducting research. Like, what does it look like this year versus 5 years for the work that the Rhythm Project is doing? How does it make its way into schools and families' hands in a manner that really dramatically impacts the outcomes that you're seeking?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what we're up to now, and I know unquestionably that 5 years from now it's going to look different because it's moving and evolving so quickly. But I'll tell you our best bets on this. So if what we want is a force of young people who are critical consumers and producers of AI and who are really valuing and prioritizing their human relationships in their life, then we think there are three ways in which the Rhythm Project can contribute to that. So the first is through trying to generate insights that are at the intersection of tech foresight with what young people actually really think. And so this is our research wing, but we don't think about it as, capital R research for publication, but more about what are the actionable insights that help us start to see what's coming and what do young people think about it and what do they want from it. So that's the first body of work. Um, and I didn't say this, but I earlier mentioned my husband, and I didn't loop back to it.
The through line didn't come back. Yeah, let me hear about it.
So part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with foresight is my husband's now a futurist at Salesforce. And so part of what I see is the investment that the private sector makes in considering scenarios for what's going to come and then how to respond. And I just keep thinking, we don't have that in the social sector.
Yes.
So we are always on our heels reacting to the vision of big tech or other forces, whereas I just think young people have so much more power and agency. Um, and so part of what I'm trying to really figure out is like, what is coming? And then what do young people think about it? And how do we, figure out what about that matters to our sector, particularly in education? So that's all bucket of work number one. Number two is we're trying to figure out how to build a coalition of leaders who are really sparked into action on this. So we think about this as our spark strategy in large part because relationships, they impact everything, your health and well-being, your learning outcomes in school, your economic mobility, your of American democracy. It impacts everything, but no one's day job is to be responsible for the development of young people's healthy relationships, right? Like that doesn't going to show up on an
Right.
leader's report card. and for
Yeah.
and, and so part of what we're trying to do is help people say, like, there is a real disruption that's coming that is as significant as the arrival of the smartphone. And it's not necessarily good or bad. No tech is inherently good or bad, but it's not neutral. And so, how do we help people understand what's coming and then see themselves as responsible and on the hook for shaping the future as it needs to be? So, those Spark activities for us are everything from convenings like the one I mentioned, to workshops that we've been doing with educators and school leaders, to dinner parties, because it's a whole lot more fun to play games and talk about this, over a bottle of wine or with good friends. And one of the methods that we've been exploring that I think has so much potential is around something called experiential futures. And so the idea of this has been inspired by an Australian futurist named Stuart Candy. And part of his observation is that as humans and as leaders or educators, however you self-identify, it's like very, very difficult to imagine possible futures. And that is true because when you look at the brain, research shows that the same part of the brain that thinks about the future also stores memories from the past. So it's physiologically difficult to imagine possibilities, especially when you've got something as disruptive as AI. So if that's the case, part of what we want to do is create opportunities for people to nourish and cultivate that kind of radical imagination about the future. And so what we do is we invite people to time travel. So we work with these incredible performers who are immersive theater experts who basically we co-create and craft these rooms of the future. You step into that future. The year is 2040. The actors engage you as though not like you're watching a show, but you're just in a room, signing up for a consumer product or in a school of the future. And then we come out of that future and ask ourselves, well, what about that possibility do you want to pull towards you? What about this do you want to mitigate against? And then what does that mean for your leadership? So all of this is like fun, immersive ways to try to bring to life and spark more people into this body of work. So that's the second body of work. And then lastly, the newest thing, and you asked us specifically about how do school leaders and teachers get involved. The third is the newest body of work where we're actually building out curricula right now. And I should say curricula loosely. I don't have any expectations that schools, for the most part, will adopt entire courses on this. But we're creating a suite of resources and tools that are all modular in nature that are direct to youth facing. So they could be used. We're seeing Zach at DSST in Colorado start to use it in a civics class. We see it's going to be run at a camp. We're going to see others at an after-school program, a peer-to-peer model in Jefferson County. So we're testing lots of ways to take this content and curricula that we see is really juicy and figure out where and how to fit it in and around the school day. So that's that last part. And if people are excited to try that with me, let me know because we're in experimentation and learning stage. So we're looking for good collaborators.
Oh, that's so exciting. I mean, first of all, Michelle, like I can't even fathom so much of what you're talking about in a real sense because of how in the now I live, right? Like every single day. I adore though that your own relationship at home has impacted so much of thinking of the future. And I do think folks can be scared with AI, right? You said that's what kids say. Like parents, we see you, teachers, you're scared. You're scared for us. And sometimes when you're scared, you avoid.
Right, that's right.
But you're diving right in. And that is so exciting. That is so exciting.
Well, let me just say one thing too and this is like something again I really learned from watching Mike and Yusuf. But it's this idea that if you just start to play, if you just start to tinker with these tools, they become less theoretical and out there and much more something that you can understand and start to develop a point of view on yourself. And so I think part of the reason why this is so effective and why we're seeing so many people just like having a blast and responding to the content we're putting out is because it goes from being like theoretical or scary or out there to something that you can see and touch, whether it's something that's on the market today or a future you can actually step into. And once it becomes something that is tactile or visceral, it's just less scary, and you can start to see
Totally.
ways in which you can influence it in different ways. So part of me is like, if you feel afraid, that's totally understandable. Just start to go play with stuff, and
Mhm.
I can, make recommendations about what to play with if you're curious about how AI might start to transform human relationships.
It's funny. I live in this world where for my work, I'm working in ed tech. I'm using AI all day, every day. I have my teams using it. We talk about how we're using it. We talk about our prompting or what tool's been useful. But then I also am a mom and I have all these mom friends who, some of whom work, some of whom don't work. Those that do work are not necessarily in technology. And
Yeah.
so I have this really unique vantage point to your comment about like just play with it, where my mom friends, many of whom were scared to use AI. And now I see in the past few months, like a rapid adoption. I don't know what's driving it in
Yeah.
that part of my life, but like a mom friend who called me the other day said, so I just read this through ChatGPT, and this is the letter I want to write to the school about getting my daughter evaluated. This is a woman who previously like could not
Yeah.
put pen to paper, has really poor experiences with school associations, and now so much of her world is unlocked where she feels more confident interacting with the professionals at our local district
Yeah.
because of AI.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a common story. And well, let me just say, pretty soon that distinction is going to get muddled. Like right now, you have to kind of choose to use it. But
mm-hmm.
even just the last couple of months, we talk a lot about character AI, because one of the big disruptions that we see for how young people relate and are using AI is because they are starting to connect to characters or to a companion on the other side of the AI. This is a big shift, right? So we went from like, we are using technology right now to connect us as people to other people. But what's happening is we are now moving to a world where we're using technology to connect to other technology and build a relationship
Mm,
with tech itself. So
yes.
AIs, they've become so compelling and human-like that there's a real sense of relationship and reciprocal dynamics that feel they mirror human interactions. And so character AI was the thing that most people were talking about for a while, in part because there was a really unfortunate news story about where this went really badly for a young man who took his own life after being encouraged to do so by a character. But this is the third most popular generative AI app. So it goes ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Character AI. So this is not on the margins. This is like a big thing, and it's targeting primarily to young people. But the more important shift is that in just the last few weeks, now you don't just have to sign on to Character AI and download it, make an intentional choice to sign up. Those same characters are appearing on Instagram, or they're like getting embedded into the apps that kids are already using. And that's true for us as adults too. So it's in your story, it's still the friends aha. Like I'm figuring out how to
Sure.
choose to go to AI, but pretty soon this stuff is just going to be so embedded in everything we do. We're not even going to be consciously choosing it in that same way. And we're starting to see that happen for young people.
I'm glad you called this piece out about character AI. You and I had spoken about it previously when we connected, and I went down a rabbit hole after you and I talked about it because
Sorry.
I'm not living there yet. My kids are younger. I did read the news story about this unfortunate incident with the young man, but it felt really distant to me. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What are the conversations you're having at the Rhythm Project about character AI and how to help kids navigate this almost dynamic relationship with computers as
Yeah.
opposed to those with other humans, and what you think is coming next?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Um, I think the way we simply talk, like the way to talk about this simply with young people is to say, when building a relationship with AI, and by relationship, I don't mean you're using it as a tool or resource to support you in homework. I mean, you're talking to this as though you would talk to a person. And it might be, first, I'm going to say, it can be for lots of different use cases. It can be because you are practicing English. It could be because you are trying to dream into a storyline for fiction that you're writing. It could be because you have a celebrity crush. It could be because, any number of reasons why you choose a character and start to be in a conversation that feels like it mirrors a human conversation. Um, teachers actually, I've seen use this as a really positive use case, is bringing a character, a literary fiction or historical figure to life, right? So there's full use cases
Fun.
for this.
Yeah.
More often than not, young people are using it for many, many, many hours a day because they are lonely. So that's the thing that I would say is the concerning part of this. And so, and part of the reason why this is so troubling is because you can imagine a world where those digital relationships start to replace human relationships. And so, they can be designed however you want. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't tell you anything negative unless you ask for that explicitly. And even then, they often, are going to try to make things comfortable for you so you could go back and keep using it. So these are frictionless relationships that are designed entirely based on your imagination, and often don't mirror the same kind of um, needs that actual humans really have. This is a one-way relationship. And so the reason why I say that that's so important is because there are both positive use cases for this, and it can also be quite problematic. So we talk to young people about this as it can be both a vitamin or Vicodin. And by vitamin, it's like this could be a nutrient-rich way to add value to your relationships, or to be able to ask a question that you might be embarrassed to ask another human, and you can work through things that are complicated and figure it out and help you de-escalate your emotions so that you can get back into the conversation with your friend after you had this big blowout. Like those are positive use cases that actually strengthen your ability to be in relationship with others. That's a vitamin. On the Vicodin side, it could also take you out of pain in a moment that you need to be taken out of pain. So in a crisis state, there's some early evidence that this could be actually quite important in reducing suicidal ideation or solving for very acute needs in a time-bound way. And like Vicodin, it can also be very dangerous and addictive. And so being able to help young people understand this possibility and this range, and then build the awareness to ask, is this serving me and the kind of relationships I want, or is it actually eroding the very things I'm longing for? Feels like a really important task as we look to what's ahead.
So much of this speaks to arming our schools with the knowledge to help students understand and interact with AI ethically. But as a parent, it really, for me, resonates with raising kids to be confident and make decisions as an independent thinker. When I hear you say the vitamin versus Vicodin, I'm like, oh, I'm using that for everything. My kids don't understand what Vicodin is yet, but like, I feel like so much of that is about character.
Yeah, right.
Because
Yeah.
it's when you're insecure is when you're most vulnerable and
Right.
susceptible to outside influence, whether that be peer pressure from a human or peer pressure and the addictive nature of technology.
Yeah, that's really well said. Yep. I do. I feel like this is a moment of like values interrogation. If young people have
Yes.
time and space to say, what do I really, really want? What do I value and why is that important? And are these technologies advancing that or hindering it? They have very clear opinions. Honestly, they just aren't often asked, and they don't often have the time and space to self-reflect. So part of our experiences that we're again building and testing right now are designed to do that, and designed to do that in community, so that you're not just on an individual reflection process, but you get to then talk about it with others. So for example, we have this card sort activity where there's, strengthens human connection, erodes human connection, it depends. And each of the kids get a set of use cases. And is it okay to alter your photo to represent yourself to somebody you haven't met? Does that strengthen your connection, erode your connection, or it depends? Is it okay to alter someone else's image? If so, does it, strengthen, erode? It depends. And part of what we're trying to do is get them to like play their cards and then challenge each other. Well, what if this was the case? Well, what if this was the case? So in doing so, you get the benefit of other people's points of view to sharpen and hone your own perspective. Bring these sort of conversations that are often sort of invisible or in the back into the forefront, make them okay, and do it in community, which is an active social connection in of itself. So that's the spirit of it. Again, this like really good instinct you have that we just need to help young people pause to take stock of this, and then find that sort of North Star values compass that they want to guide them through all of this as it, gets increasingly more complex.
I feel like we could talk about this for days. And there are many places and spaces where folks can hear you talk about this topic, including some upcoming conferences that I know you'll be at. And I'm looking forward to connecting in person. But I do have to get us to the place where we wrap up our conversation, which feels very, very difficult. I want to acknowledge that. Michelle, there's so much of your work that is feeling comfortable in the unknown and helping people to acknowledge that the unknown is like the space of AI and its rapid proliferation and rapid development is really, beyond the scope of what we can figure out, but sinking their tentacles into the parts that are real and here and now so that we can build the character and community to handle what comes next.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what advice you would give a child, a student, a young adult today to handle all of that large unknown.
I think that it sort of builds from what we were just saying, which is like pause to ask, what do you actually really long for in the relationships that you have with others? And then, is this serving you or is this not? I think that's the most pragmatic pause point we can, create for young people in order to develop a sense of agency. But I will say maybe to your question about what's the most pragmatic thing we can do as adults to make that easier for youth. There's this one insight that I saw come out of our research that I cannot believe, I can't shake as somebody who spent 25 years, in education. And we ask kids in the very beginning of our interviews to map over the course of their day where their human connection is high and low. And then to tell us, describe the highs and the lows. What are you doing? Where are you? What are you doing at those moments of high and low connection? And the point I want to make is that as adults, we spend a lot of time right now, especially as educators, talking about what's happening, and parents talking about what's happening with kids when they're on their devices in their bedrooms. But what we are seeing come back on those maps is that those moments are actually higher for a number of young people than the time in which they're spending in classrooms. So those lows are often when they're sitting in our classes, surrounded in real life with other peers who are their age, with adults who are embodied, teaching them. And those are some of the last moments of human connection in their day. So if there's one thing that I could say that I think is not even about the AI, but is about creating the conditions in which young people already have thriving, healthy relationships so that this stuff becomes a resource instead of a seductive replacement, is to leverage the times that we already have young people in person to strengthen our explicit commitment to building healthy, thriving human connection. And there's so much of that in the school day.
That's a word. That is a word. And I am so grateful that is where we're ending today, because it has so much power and impact into the conversation about how do we make teaching and learning better, and how do we keep schools human? Well, we have to make them human first. Clearly, there's some areas we're still lacking.
Yeah. And that's entirely within our control. So for me, that feels so empowering, because it's not about taking on the tech giants. It's about taking the context that we already shape and influence every day, where young people are like together, and making that a point of like meaningful, like human connection.
Michelle Culver, thank you so much for sharing this important work, and that you really are leading the way in focusing on. And I'm excited to see where you continue to grow and affect change. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you. I feel lucky to be here. Thanks for what you're doing, Haley.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in today to this incredible episode. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.